Hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa special broadcast with myself, Tanya Habimana. We're here with Siemens to discuss a topic that affects all of us. Greater infrastructure challenges, well, not just challenges, but actually solutions affecting Greater Johannesburg. We experience it every day, and pressures are mounting, coming from aging infrastructure, rapid climate change, and a population that is growing at a rapid rate. Here at this panel, we're going to be discussing the solutions that are going to change our everyday lives. I'm joined by an esteemed panel, which I will introduce to you now. To my left is Sir Sipho Mosai, the Chief Executive at Rand Water. Then we have Sabina Dalamo, Chief Executive Officer at Siemens. Aradhna Pananduram, Acting Research Group Leader, Energy Industry Team, Energy Center at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and Peter Varndell, Chief Executive Officer at the NEPAD Business Foundation, Southern and Eastern Africa. So without further ado, let's start this conversation. Now, Aradhna, I'd like to start with you. You have a background actually at Eskom. You are an engineer by profession, and you have been doing extensive research in terms of the energy supply, the grid integration, as well as the energy challenges that we are currently facing. What have been your main findings when it comes to the landscape in terms of energy for Johannesburg?
So I think it goes back to the broad energy landscape in South Africa. And looking at South Africa, I think we are all aware that we have an energy crisis in the country with aging infrastructure from a generation point of view, filtering down into distribution and transmission as well. So I think the problems at a national level have very much filtered down to this local level, and we're facing the same issues with, as I've mentioned, the aging infrastructure, poor performance, and lack of maintenance on the infrastructure. But I think the opportunity for the energy transition and what that brings for the country, I think, is very much apparent. And as the country, I think we need to kind of leverage on that opportunity and use that to move forward with sustainable solutions, as well as trying to fix the problems that have been developed as part of this long aging infrastructure problem that we've had in the country.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to turn my attention to you, Sipho, because on the one hand, we have energy. We've all experienced it. But we also have water, which has made quite a few headlines in the recent weeks. How would you describe the current landscape? I mean, we've heard the terms water shedding, water allocation, and you and I had a discussion about this earlier. But from your words, how would you paint the current landscape?
Yeah, I think within particularly Johannesburg context, let alone South African context, we probably should call water adaptation, and I think we're going through that, excuse the pun, watershed moment, where we need to relook at our interface and our interaction as a people with water. I think water is a scarce resource in many respects. The earth does not get any new water from the outer space every year. The earth recycles water. And that pattern is unpredictable. I mean, we have one of the highest evaporation rate, but one of the lowest rainfall. And with climate change, it really requires of us to adapt and look at how we interface with the water. Up here in Joburg, one of the highest water consumers of water in the world. Currently, we're sitting at about 300 liters per capita per day. On average, the world is sitting at 173. So we have been asking ourselves questions, and we want to take our consumers through the journey of clearly understanding that this is a finite resource. We have climate change. We really have to look at the way we use water. Where do we use it? What do we do with drinking water? Do we have to use drinking water for non-drinking purposes? The world is looking and asking themselves those questions. So ours really is to take our consumers and our municipalities, by and large, through that challenge.
Now, in terms of when we look at energy and the current situation that we find ourselves in, as well as water, we've very often looked to government and to government organizations in order to solve for this problem. Now, Siemens has been actively working on initiatives representing the private sector in a way in terms of trying to find solutions. Sabina, perhaps you could give us more insights into some of the initiatives that Siemens is running.
Yeah, so maybe we come very much home to where we are today at Siemens Park, right? So at Siemens Park, we do have piloted our technology we use within the regards of energy generation. As you see, we have here just short of 1 megawatt of electricity on our rooftop and on our parking lot, helping us to provide 70% of our electricity we use and also which we use here today. So you have a green broadcast. So that's one part, but also we have realized specifically in 2016 when we have the water shortage also here in Gauteng, we redid our whole garden setup, our whole technology we use in order to run our river, which we have here. And this is all done on the basis of to make sure, first of all, little water usage, as Sipho already mentioned, try to manage the way and how we consume, but also try to optimize the way on how it is managed. And so you are able to see this here at Siemens Park as a live demonstration in both of these fields. But when we go back and we talk about specifically in the energy space, and we just heard South Africa is maybe very well positioned, because what we have seen is that not only energy is an issue because of CO2 emissions and climate change aspects, which we already knew, but if you go back before the Ukraine or the Russian invasion into Ukraine, gas was largely seen as a transition energy. Mm-hmm. But we see now that this is not very much so, because for one reason, gas prices, because of the global supply chain changes due to sanctions, have rocketed in the last couple of months and making energy very expensive. And so hence it will also be difficult for a country like South Africa to afford these prices in order to fuel our electricity when our consumer are not in the position to pay for it. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it needs to be a balance. The second part is what we also have seen is that within the context of gas, that the emissions, not maybe the CO2 when you burn it, but the methane emissions which come from gas are so much higher than, for instance, with all other fossil products, that the impact on climate overall is worse. So I think the whole discussion around that kind of transition energy has changed a lot. Where does that put us? It put us in the position that we can actively discuss green energy for South Africa. And as we heard, we are in a situation where we have an aging infrastructure, so we need to invest in any case. So why don't invest into something what is now clearly the most affordable technology? It's green, it's wind and solar generated electricity.
Absolutely. And I want to get back to the renewables and those in just a moment. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you, Peter, as the NEPAD Business Foundation, you've also been involved in a number of partnerships and projects. What have been the main findings and lessons that you've experienced?
I think the biggest opportunity that we've seen is the ability to unlock the goodwill of business and supporting some of the challenges we have as a nation, as a region. Sabina mentioned earlier what Siemens has done here at their own park to contribute to the agenda. I think what we've seen, particularly through the Strategic Water Partners Network, is that companies have, to the large extent, all done this. They've done whatever they can within their factory fences to reduce their water demand, to improve their energy supply, and it's becoming a case of diminishing returns. So the opportunity now exists for them to step outside their factory fence, to partner with municipalities, to partner with government, to start to drive this agenda of energy resilience, water resilience, and that's what we're seeing. That's a big mind shift change, I think, that we've certainly seen in the last couple of years.
Now, I can't help but ask the question, why are we where we are? Now, we've heard of many reasons, and I want to ask you this specifically, Sipho. In terms of, I mean, you explained water allocation, water distribution. What led us to this point?
Yep, I just think infrastructure backlog by and large. Particularly, if you like, in the electricity setup in terms of the challenges that are affecting us. But I think by and large, if you look at the challenges specifically in our value chain, right at the tail end of the water supply value chain, you find that over the years, what we have been seeing, it's high water losses, We call it non-revenue water, precisely because municipalities are not able to generate revenue with the water that is being supplied. And then that has caught up with us. About 30-40% of the water we supply to municipality gets to waste. So we need to rapidly rise above that and deal with that backlog. I think, if you like, in my view, it's the issues of non-investment, by and large, in the water network and infrastructure. I think within South African context, we take water granted. I think we've been endowed with this resource for a number of years, and you place an order, you get it, and relatively inexpensive within South African context. If you look at the bulk water price in South Africa, at 1,000 litre, it will not buy you even 1.5 litres of bottled water. That's how relatively inexpensive it is. With 11 rand 61, you cannot get 1.5 litre of bottled water at any retail store, and we'll be supplying 1,000 litre of that. So I think it has been relatively inexpensive, and our attitude has always been, don't worry, we'll sort it out. So I think the challenges that we have, by and large, in our value chain are related to infrastructure backlog that we need to get going, from upgrade, operations, maintenance, and really that's what got us here.
And how is business dealing with this, Sabina? Because obviously these are issues that are preventing you from operating at optimal levels. So how are you dealing with it in the here and now when it comes to your operating environment?
Well, I mean, look, for us, obviously, water restrictions are a concern. However, at Siemens Park, we did cater for it, that if there are shortages, that we are fully operational again. And obviously, that's an expense, because when you drive in here, you will also see that we have massive water tanks here. They are here in case, there should be a fire, that if the pressure is low, we are able to sprinkle any fire hazard for that matter. But our support is very much to the industry, which in our case uses water as a product. Yeah, I mean, if you have water demand, like for instance in the food and beverage environment, in hospitals, but also in the automobile environment, we help our customers to find solutions to optimize their water consumption, but also manage the water process in general within the plant. And so it's not only within commercial proposition, but also in the case of, for instance, the municipalities or like bulk suppliers like Rent Water, but also a city of Cape Town, for instance, or eThekwini Water in Durban, where we help them to run their systems, and our technology, we call it seawater, not in the context of the ocean, but Siemens Water Solutions. Here we have developed software, but also intelligent monitoring ways where we can identify early leak detection, because as Sipo said, 40% of the product is wasted. So if it's wasted, you don't have revenue collection. And through our technology, we can, first of all, increase on the metering side your revenue collection to make it like smart meters. We have implementations of that in Ghana as well as in Botswana, where countries already a little bit ahead of what we do currently in South Africa, but also where we have dedicated systems where you can see if there is pressure on a pipe, if there is a water leakage, and you have the possibility to detect it immediately before, gushing water is coming out of the system. What means when I talk about detection, then it also gives, any customer, in that context maybe Rent Water, because we're talking about it today, the possibility to maybe on a platform type of thing, dispatch a technician, which he sees on his iPhone or whatever handheld you will give him, where the smallest level of pressure is and where the leak currently occurs, so that it can be fixed immediately. I think one thing which we advocate as Siemens is, because we have learned that also digital products in Africa are implementable. And I gave you the example of Ghana and Botswana, where we have digital technology for water management put in place. And digital technology has the possibility, first of all, that you can manage it through, obviously, the cloud. Gives you more transparency at any given point in time. So even if SIPO would like to know, where do we have a water leakage, yeah, in case the system is fully implemented, he will be able to see it, yeah. But also it will help you to ensure that you don't have to have physical infrastructure in cable and the likes, because as we know, we are in a country where these things get vandalized, and you need to, remove that kind of attraction to the illicit trade to make sure that you are able to provide your services. And that is a complete different way on how we look at water.
That's a very tangible example of using innovation for our here and now, for our short term, and how we can, as a people, private sector, public sector, work together to find implementable solutions. But Peter, I'd like to hear from you as well, because I know that the NEPAD Business Foundation has been operating across Southern and Eastern Africa. What are some other examples that could be implemented in the here and now for a better Greater Johannesburg?
I mean, I think the solutions are the same across the continent, to be honest. We've seen water partnerships in various municipalities across Southern Africa particularly. But the model is very much the same. It's about saying, what are the challenges and how can the big water users step in to support the municipality of solving those? And fundamentally, it comes down to the same issue. It comes down to getting the best use of the resource that you have available. It comes down to non-revenue water, which has already been shared, and the technology required to first of all understand how your system's working, where you're losing water, and then to adapt and make sure that you can solve that. So certainly here in South Africa, there's some positive movements. We've been involved in a partnership with a municipality here in the country with a high case of non-revenue water. And the intervention of the companies involved has allowed them to understand better how the system works, to start to manage pressure in the system better, consequently reduce leaks, but then importantly get billing right, so that customers are paying what they should be. And there's many different examples. I know in other municipalities there's been a big drive towards some of the government buildings where there's big leaks in the systems, to domestic water use where there's also big leaks in the systems. So knowing where those challenges are and knowing who the right people are to start to plug the leaks is fundamental to the solution. So that's something we on a campaign to deal with now. We've had successful pilot run in one of the municipalities, and now we're scaling up to do that across the country. And that does include working with the municipalities that ran water supply, with the city of Joburg, and with others. So there's huge opportunity there.
Brilliant. Now, Aradhana, bringing this to the energy conversation. I mean, with water, we heard of some of the challenges that have been experienced that have led to this. But when it comes to energy, what are some of the implementable short-term solutions that would have immediate effect in improving the situation we find ourselves in?
So I think there's 2 points. There's solutions that can be implemented by the customer, and there's solutions that need to be implemented by the government and the municipalities. So from a municipality perspective, they need to start, looking at priority lists of projects that need to be form part of the infrastructure projects, because there is, as was mentioned with water, there is also the infrastructure backlog for electricity. And I think there was an article that mentioned 330 billion rand of infrastructure backlog just in Johannesburg. But in this financial year, there was only 1.7 billion rand that was allocated, or 7 billion rand for Johannesburg, but city of Joburg was 1.7 billion. And that is minuscule compared to the 330 billion rand. So there's definite need for prioritization of these projects. There's definite need for, a proper long-term plan for CAPEX, OPEX, and rehabilitation of infrastructure, and also need to transform within the municipality in terms of climate change and sustainable infrastructure. Then we go back to, what is kind of encapsulated in the 4Ds. We call it the decarbonization, digitalization, deregulation, and decentralization. So basically, you want to kind of encapsulate that solution in all of the solutions that you implement. So from an energy perspective, I think it's quite an easy solution, and a lot of customers are doing it, installing their own PV and backup generation. And this is, I think, has been enabled by the government as well, as part of, the Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act, and not having actually any license required for a system of any size at the moment, as the President had mentioned. All you just need is an off-taker for that energy that you would need to produce. So I think there's that solution, but I think many customers may find it very difficult to implement those solutions because it's very capital intensive for them. And going through load shedding and going through an economic crisis of losing business because of load shedding, it's almost like a snowballing effect that, they are in this situation where they cannot put in the capital infrastructure. And I think that's where some innovative solutions that form part of, like public-private partnerships that can implement projects and also portfolios of projects that can help the needs of the smaller businesses. I guess, the bigger businesses can do it themselves, but the issue lies within the smaller businesses and the economies within that. So there's a myriad of challenges. There are solutions, but I think, there's also government and regulation that also needs to come to the party for us to enable these solutions correctly. Because there's also a risk of implementing solutions that are not safe and, not correct or in terms of installation and having the proper certification for the customers themselves. So that's also a challenge that needs to be worried about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch upon some very important aspects, and that particularly of investments and funding into this. Where's the funding coming from? Sipho, I'd actually like to ask you, in terms of the projects that you're currently running at the moment, how are you going about this? How are you looking to solve for some of the issues that you're experiencing, and how do you view the future?
Yeah, but just in terms of funding as a utility and our scheduling, we are a trading entity and self-funding. Really, it's us generating our own top line, covering all our costs, and making sure that we have a surplus of sort to reinvest into the business, to upgrade, refurbish, operate, and maintain. One of the few utilities in the world. We are 120 years now. We have not gotten a cent from government. No bailouts. Not that we can't do with that, but so I just think that's how we fund. But we also Johannesburg Security Exchange debt listed outfit, where we also crowdfund or pull in the private sector to assist us with a good weighted average cost of capital to invest into the business. So if you like, you want to have a good mix between, money that comes from your tariffs, the private sector involvement in terms of funding these projects. We're looking at, for example, later on we'll move towards solutions, but hydropower, it's the EPC contract. It's going to be 10 kit, and we bring the private sector funding as well. And then, of course, going forward, we believe that we should start getting some allocation from the fiscus to assist us to deal with some of the challenges in local government space. I think what you're seeing is that water is the second biggest revenue spinner in municipalities, but as soon as the money comes in, it deals with other requirements in the municipalities and very little investment that goes into water. So to deal with some of these challenges, we believe that you need to have, if you like, a multiplicity of infrastructure, capital funding that is coming into our sector to deal with some of these challenges. Yeah.
And Peter, I'd also like to ask you a similar question. What's best in class in terms of unlocking more funding towards improving infrastructure?
So I think we've all seen the success of the energy unlocking through the IPP program. So there's been much talk over the years about doing the same in the water sector. It's not quite so simple in the water sector, given that it is government-owned infrastructure. You can't just go develop it on the side somewhere and connect. So there is a move to that kind of model to see, what is possible given the constraints that municipalities do have. How do you then use your customers themselves to be part of that financing solution, making them have a direct offtake with the operator that can enable that. But importantly also to look at the MFMA, the PFMA provisions that will be restrictive to allowing for private capital to flow in there. So that's work that we're looking at the moment, to see what is possible, to see what the red flags are, because we know they're there. It's now a case of how can we use the goodwill of government currently through programs like Operation Vulindlela and the like to unlock some of those legal impediments that are there at the moment. So the opportunity is there, but it's going to take a lot of work, early stage preparation work, to understand the viability, the challenges, the modalities and mechanisms to be able to allow for private capital to flow.
And Sabina, is this perhaps an area where we could see more public-private partnerships? And if so, what type?
Well, I mean, look, from a positioning point of view, and we just heard that, the energy schedule has also been adjusted. I mean, in August was the first time that there is a feed-in tariff defined, which means that not only the traditional IPP program will be commercially viable, but also private initiatives or smaller activities, because now you have a basis under which you also can get bankable projects going, right? So that is one part. The second aspect specifically was in the energy space is that there is a lot of money available out. Yeah, I mean, there are many people which want to invest in green technology.
Yeah.
And if you just think about, I mean, this is also valid for Siemens, we support projects not only with capital but also with equity in the context of when there are green projects and they have societal impact. And so we are not the only company, so all the multinationals have committed some kind of targets of net zero in their total operation and their balance sheet between 2030 and 2050. And so therefore you see a lot of capital being available globally to invest. And South Africa is definitely one of the destinations. You will know that during COP26, South Africa has been the only country to seal a deal of $8.5 billion being made available by the UK, US, France, and Germany for the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And that means loans, but not only concessional loans from these governments, but also attracting private companies to come in here. Why is that so important? Because it is important for the attractiveness of South Africa. Yeah. And the companies which are here want to be here because South Africa on the African continent is a country which is relatively easy to do business, right? But when you think about the multinationals, then they have an inherent interest to decarbonize their value chain, not only their own production, but the total value chain, because that is a commitment they gave to the capital market on their balance sheet and their commitment going forward. And for us, in South Africa, we better, transition once for that renewable energy is a cheaper input on the energy prices, but also in order to keep the multinationals in the country which contribute to our GDP. Because if they think they only will be able indefinite to purchase coal-fired electricity, then their answer post-2030, 2050 is maybe one which is not in favor of South Africa. And therefore, the initiative specifically, as Peter mentioned, with Operation Vulindlela, addresses these kind of transitional topics, not only which in the energy space, but also in water, transport, and the rule of law.
Absolutely. And this forms a very good basis that we'll be talking about shortly after the break. I would like firstly to thank you, Peter, for joining us. That was Peter Warendal, Chief Executive Officer at NEPAD Business Foundation Southern and Eastern Africa. After the break, we'll be joined by a new panelist, Monique Griffith, Deputy Director at Smart City Office. We'll now be taking a short break, and after the break, we'll be back. Thank you. And welcome back to this CNBC Africa special broadcast where we are here at the Siemens Park discussing solutions for Greater Johannesburg's infrastructure challenges. We're now joined by Monique Griffith, who is the Deputy Officer at Smart City Office. Welcome to the panel, Monique. I'd like to actually start with you. So we've been discussing some of the current challenges, where we are, and the short-term solutions, but now we want to turn our focus towards the future. Smart City Office. Now we've talked about energy issues, we've talked about water issues. What are some of the challenges that the Smart City strategy has come to solve?
Well, particularly, we're looking towards how do we future-proof the city. So we know right now that we are at the precipice of something, either a very good solution that moves us into a positive direction, or we have more challenges to deal with. Smart City is looking at how do we bring the private sector, municipalities, and even our citizens together for solutions into the future. I mean, this is probably the crossroads where we really all need to be hands on deck. And so we are looking at creating that enabled environment, looking at how do we bring in more innovation, creating an urban living lab or a sandbox or a more learning environment where people who are on the ground as our citizens who understand their challenges can bring solutions forward, but that's paired up with the municipality who owns the infrastructure, and that's paired up with the private sector who, one, has the investment finances to put into it and often have the resources and the expertise. So really, to be smart going forward, it has to be a combined effort. Another thing, I mean, we were able to put this wonderful World Cup together, and that was literally coming together of all of those sectors in order to have that shown. Well, this is a World Cup type of event for us to create this world-class city that we say that we are promising our citizens going forward.
Now, Aradhna, I'd like to turn my focus to you. At your opening statement, you mentioned a few technologies that would be beneficial for us in terms of implementing them. Which ones are these? What are we looking at in terms of innovation when it comes to the energy infrastructure?
I think we don't have to actually look very far because I want to say this and might tickle a bit of a few people, but in the city of Cape Town, they have been implementing and creating enabling environments for this combination of people that Monique has spoken of. And it's bringing about, this decentralization kind of vision that I spoke about. And one such, I think, combination solution is the aggregator solution. So it's basically creating small grids within the actual network of whatever municipality jurisdiction that is. And within that grid, you create almost a time shift enabling environment for people to use generation when you think it may be cheaper, and for them to actually generate electricity when you know that the grid needs it and when it is actually more expensive to generate it, and that's during the peak times. And it's a combination of solutions with rooftop PV and battery storage technologies, as well as the digitalization element that definitely needs to be there to be smart. And now also going back into flexibilities and, the actual demand side of the grid. So trying to create enabling environment for customers on the ground to use energy at the time that, as I said, it's cheaper and generate when it's actually more expensive. So it's basically a combination of those solutions, but the main key driver is the smart aspect of it. And you need to almost move in the direction of what we call active distribution systems, where you are able to, monitor things in real time and understand what your network is actually doing, create enabling environments for you to actually make money when you need to, and, you create that, the load shedding aspect and reduce those challenges. And just going back into City of Cape Town, they've actually gone to a stage where we are having stage 3 load shedding, they are having stage 1 load shedding. And it's because of the environments that they've created within the municipalities to enable these aspects. And as Sabina has mentioned, the feed-in tariff is one of the major enabling environments for this to happen. So it's also trying to understand those solutions, but keeping in mind the cost and the future of the infrastructure that is needed as well.
Now, when we talk innovation from an energy perspective, I think it's quite easy to understand when you're talking rooftop PV, when you're talking battery storage. But from a water perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think the way I define smart within the water sector point of view and innovation is not technology only. By smart, we're talking about new ways of doing things, different ways of doing things. I think if you really start at the top end of our value chain, we have been largely dependent on surface water. And we are looking at different ways as a sector to get water into the system. You'll see that by and large, coastally, the sector is moving towards desalination. Here, we are moving towards groundwater utilization. For us, that's smart. That's finding solutions different to the challenges that we have. And as you go down the value chain, you're also looking at, of course, you're bringing technology as well, digital technology in terms of solving the challenges that we have. As we speak, we are detecting leaks from satellite, Historically, we used to go around, walk the pipes, and mechanically trying to check if there's a leak here. You don't have to do that now. You go into a satellite, it tells you where the leak is, so you're able to respond quickly. And if you cannot, as an example, find the exact location of the leak, we have a smart ball, we call it a smart ball, you send it through the pipe, it tells you exactly where the leak is, and then you send a technician to deal with that. So I think we are looking at doing things differently. And for example, when you're talking about building dams, the surface water, you're also creating a carbon footprint. We're talking about decarbonization. So it means if you start drawing from the ground, you are eliminating that. Decentralization as well. We are looking at, do we really have to build big dams to supply everybody? What can we do locally? In communities, do we really have to get water from, in Gauteng situation, Lesotho, to give people of Karankua north of Gauteng to get water? The answer may not be. So I think for us, innovation is exactly that. What we did about 3 years ago, we established what we call an innovation hub, underpinned by our strategy that is innovation-driven, risk-based, to exactly find smart ways, innovative ways of doing things. In the innovation hub is driven by Rainwater Institution, and this is where clever men and women get together and say, what if we do this? What if this happens? To find the solutions to the challenges that we have, not only at back level, but across the entire value chain.
There's a lot in what you've just said, but one thing that I particularly liked hearing was the notion of, do we have to be centralized? What about a decentralized structure? Because that also translates to the transfer of jobs into rural areas, for example. And now also when we're talking innovation, when we're talking green technology, renewables, there's also this notion of the skills. Do we have the skills that we need? Do we need to retransform some of the skills that are currently present? Now, Sabina, I know that Siemens has been working on this in terms of partnering with institutions to develop the skills of the future for 4IR quite specifically. What does that look like for you?
Well, look, I mean, from our point of view, we have a partnership, for instance, with the CSIR in order to develop skills for Industry 4.0, and this is really around the areas of smart townships, water, electricity, food and beverage, but also cybersecurity. Because one thing I do know, and we have seen that also over the last couple of months, is that also digital technology is improving, and I think South Africa, the African continent currently has about 139 data centers already. Europe has 219, so we are really catching up. So digital technologies become really state of the art, but it also means we need to deal with potential people which don't have the right intention when using these kind of systems, and therefore the partnership with the CSIR are to develop the cybersecurity aspects as part of our Charter of Trust is something really vital, because it's an overarching concept to ensure that there is system integrity. But on the other side, I mean, you talk about skills. We at Siemens have a number of partnerships with the universities, with TVET colleges. And for instance, one part which we had about 6 months ago, we gave licenses to about 40 universities in South Africa and in the African continent, relating to coding software, our Mendix coding software, so that people have, and young people have, the possibility to use coding as an entry into the workforce, because you not necessarily need like a mathematics degree for it. Another initiative which we just recently closed is with the UN Women Initiative for 625 women from the African continent. We call it Girls Can Code, which we basically bring close to coding, and through our people organization, we have also developed a program which we call C-Ment, the C-Mentoring program, where our engineers and students, which are part of our bursary system, mentoring other young people to actually enter the workforce and to participate in our business, and hopefully also in our clients' business, and wherever these kind of skills are needed.
And that's so important, particularly the notion of having these skills immediately integrated to be able to participate in the workplace of today. Now, Monique, when it comes to the smart city, when we look at the city of today and the city of the future, what's missing in terms of skills?
Well, before we go into skills, I think one of the things that we're missing in the conversation is enabled environment, because we keep talking about how we need innovation, and we come up with solutions, but municipalities, and specifically Johannesburg, we don't necessarily have the enabled environment to absorb those things. Therefore, even the skills discussion, where are the skills going to go to if we are not creating the enabled environment for all these wonderful solutions that the private sector has? So I think one of the things that we are focusing and honing in on is how we're looking at frameworks that help us to bring innovation in. We've got a framework going now that has to be presented in order to make it easier for pilots and for the private sector to demonstrate what they're able to do. But then the next thing is the longevity and the sustainability of that. Because once they finish a pilot, how do we bring them into the city as a contract? They demonstrate that it works, they demonstrate that people love it, but then we can't bring them in permanently into the city. So that's another thing that we are addressing as the smart city. Because if we don't get this enabled environment together, we have solutions from everyone, and beautiful solutions, but they won't go into the city and be permanent. I mean, we used to have that app where you could just show where there's a pothole in the roads, and the JRA would come and repair it nicely. But it was a pilot. After the pilot was over, it's gone. They couldn't bring it in permanently to the city. So ours is looking at how do we set the groundwork for all of this innovative environment to happen, and once those solutions actually demonstrate that they work, that we can bring them in permanently into the city. And that's probably one of our biggest hurdles with the MFMA and the PFMA, and we have to figure out how do we create kind of an exception for these particular types of things that deal with the biggest problems that we have in the city and the infrastructure that we need for the future.
Absolutely. Sabina, I see you nodding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, look, one thing really is the public procurement framework, which we currently see, because it has the right intention to why it's there. But, particularly if you want to develop something where, the service of the residents is the output, it becomes very difficult to make it a commercial proposition. So if you look at the South African Constitution, so water and electricity is a basic right. So a company never will be able to provide a basic right on a commercial basis. So it can only be the state who can provide for it. And I mean, we as Siemens, we have had a good experience with one of the projects in our health environment. It's in Durban, the Albert Luthuli Hospital, which was a public-private partnership. And so the government ensured that the facility was given, the government organized the doctors and the nurses, and the private sector organized to run the hospital. And so if you now go to a public hospital, all the discussions you have here in Johannesburg, you maybe go there and you see how a hospital is run when exactly this partnership comes into fruition. You don't go there are no queues, it's a fully paperless hospital, your files are not going missing, and the doctor will be able to record even what your treatments have been, and it makes sense. So I do hope that in the context of also Operation Vulindlela, but also the smart city environment, that we get to the point that we can partner together, because in some stuff, business is just better in running it. And I want to give you an example also on a program which eventually we have now made progress, and this is for Sebokeng. Sebokeng, you know, it's part of also the Vaal system. It's a township which is currently under administration. You will have heard they have no water, they have no electricity. Sewage is an issue. So during COVID, we decided we want to do something good, and we want to see, you know, how we can help these people, because one of the major topics, also electricity, is the biggest challenge, but we do know water is such a bigger challenge, because if you don't have water, you can basically do nothing. Yeah. And if you don't have water, you can't wash your hands, you can't have basic hygiene, and obviously having access to water and as well as electricity makes you part of society. So we started together with the IDC to develop this project, and we now eventually got it into the funding mode to develop a concept on how the community can run water and electricity with their own skills, have a youth development program around it, so that the young people with the Gauteng Development Agency can contribute their skills they have already learned. So I'm very excited to get this implemented.
I can feel the excitement, and thank you for sharing those insights, actually. It's good to have tangible examples to refer back to. Now, Monique, what I particularly liked with your point of enabled environments, or rather what sparked an interest in me, is that it speaks to the integration, it speaks to value chains, it speaks to ensuring that all actors and players are integrated and that we don't increase the graveyard of pilot projects. Now, Aradhana, you've done some research and worked and advocated quite a bit when it comes to the integration of small and medium-sized businesses into this value chain. Now, from your perspective, are we where we need to be?
No, I would say that if we look at the Renewable Independent Producer Power Program, I think there has been a lot of regulation around what is called local content. And I know there's a lot of different understandings of what local content should be. And yes, it does mainly refer to the infrastructure or like the actual hardware that's part of the value chains. But it also refers to embedding local small, medium, and micro enterprises within the value chains and trying to create economic growth for that. If we look at South Africa, small SMMEs actually create the most employment in South Africa. So it's about over 60% that SMMEs contribute to in South Africa. So if we are not creating that enabling environment for SMMEs to be part of these value chains, then we are losing out as a country. And I understand that it's good to have big private partners, from local or international contexts within these programs, and that does create economic growth. But at the end of the day, we also need to create growth in South Africa, and not only economic growth, but actual development within the citizens of the country, because we have the triple threat: unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Yeah. And we need to be able to solve those issues with these new solutions that we are creating from a sustainable point of view. And I feel that, this has been lacking, and that is why the CSR is, quite big on empowering SMMEs in various sectors. And one such program is one that we are actually going to be launching in November, called the Energy Industry Support Program. And with various partners, we are trying to create this capacity building and empowering kind of network for SMMEs to technically incubate some of them in the energy sector, to help them to move from one stage to another in their business, as well as provide the information in terms of what opportunities exist, because they don't even know what that is. They know that, yes, there's a solar PV panel, or they call it, normal PV panels, but what that means for a business and how they can, embed themselves in that value chain is definitely not understood. There are quite a few people that do know it, and I think that they consistently, participate in the REAP program, but the other SMMEs fall behind, and, we could be creating a lot of opportunities and employment opportunities in that growth as well. So I believe that capacity building for SMMEs is very important, especially if we are looking at, creating this other enabling factors like increasing of the next REAP bid window and the embedded generation rules of, the licensing regulations. If you are going to be fast-tracking those processes, trying to incorporate big generation in the power grid, you are going to be leaving behind the others because you're trying to fast-track that. And we do not have the capacity, enough capacity to be able to leverage off those opportunities enough. So that's one thing. And I just want to also touch on something that Monique had mentioned in terms of enabling environments. I think capacity building within municipalities and government is something that is seriously lacking. If we are looking at these opportunities and moving into sustainable infrastructure, these processes are all new. They are different processes that municipalities are not normally used to working with. They don't, like, some of them may not even understand the technology itself. So that capacity building is also very important. And if we are talking about PPPs, if they don't have the capacity, you won't be able to implement such. So those things are quite important for creating leveraging the opportunities that these new landscapes bring.
And that brings me into the perfect segue. How can we leverage an opportunity? There's a wise saying that says, never waste a crisis. So we are in a state of crisis. We have an energy crisis, we have a water crisis. How can we leverage the opportunity? And I'm going to take this as your closing statement, and I'll start with you, Sipho.
Yeah, I just think talking about skills as well, one of the easiest way out is to, as an example, embrace renewables. We are making a serious investment on hydropower, where we are making an investment in terms of converting kinetic energy in our pipes into electrical energy by introduction of turbines. So we are making a serious investment in reskilling our employees, because we do have engineers and scientists, electrical, mechanical, you name them, but conventional in the true sense of how we used to do business. So I think when we reskill them, we have that perfect understanding that we have not done renewables before. We have not done hydroelectric power. So we have identified a cadre of employees, because a lot of them are scared by fourth industrial revolution. They think, are we going to lose our jobs to robots? And I think our view is, no, you have to reskill. Somebody has to operate those robots. So we are undergoing a serious investment in terms of reskilling ourselves and looking at different ways of doing things, precisely because we want to leverage on the, as an example, in the electricity crisis that we have.
Okay. Sorry, sir. I'm just going to ask the answers to be short. We are ending in just 2 minutes.
No problem. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. And Sabina, how can we leverage opportunities?
Well, I think as you speak about the crisis, I do believe we have to do a couple of bold moves. And just think about Egypt. Yeah, I mean, they addressed electricity and water and transport in one shot. And that doesn't mean that you don't do small, medium enterprise development, because what we need in South Africa is economic growth. And economic growth, we're only going to get if foreign direct investment is coming. It's only going to happen if we are able to provide water, electricity 24/7 every single day. And so therefore, having this concurrent running, decide on a few things which we really want to do now, not having legislation permanently coming in between to slow it down. I think that's one prize. And in parallel, I do believe that with the broad-based Black economic empowerment framework, we have enough of opportunities to have companies which are empowered on that level to also feed in small, medium enterprises as part of the ownership. And if we work with what we have as legislation, we should be good, but let us do a few bold moves, because otherwise Egypt is really doing well.
Yeah. Thank you. Aradna?
I think I'm going to speak from a government perspective. I think having policy frameworks that is certain in terms of the development of the country. So looking at the integrated resource plan, trying to be certain in terms of the demand for this future growth of sustainable energy, the energy plan as well that is supposed to be launched. I think trying to create that certainty in the market so that you know that for these private partners as well, that it's definitely going to happen in the country. And that also enables the skills development and us trying to leverage off those opportunities.
Thank you. And Monique?
My ideal would be to have pilots happening all over the city, but the way to make that happen is to have a transparent process where all of those who have a solution, we can bring them into a room and we identify all levels of engagement, be they SME or your bigger companies and your internationals. And then we find where our key challenges are and where we need to throw those solutions. And then the municipality have a process in place, which we are recommending, so that we can actually keep those solutions on when they demonstrate that they are successful.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. You were an exceptional panel. I certainly have learned a lot, and I believe that our viewers also have. It truly shows that when we bring brilliant minds together, we can achieve much, and that our infrastructure challenges don't have to be challenges. They can be solutions. They can help us in creating the jobs that we desperately need for our youth, in creating the jobs of the future, and in helping our nation move forward in a way that benefits all of us. So thank you very much to all of you, and a big and special thanks to our audience for tuning in to this CNBC Africa special broadcast. My name is Tanya Habimana. Thank you for joining us today.